All right, let's go ahead and get
Absolutely.
started. So thanks
Okay.
everyone for coming today. It's Wednesday, August 14th, and we're here with Jeff Godhelf, who I will introduce in just a moment. In the last year, we've started working with all of you on your career evolution. As you know, we've been running a number of peer coaching calls for VPs of product who want to become CPOs or CPOs who want to become CEOs. So today we get to learn from an alum of the councils how he thinks about continuous reinvention for himself and how that might help you think about it. We have a couple more things I want to say, and then I'll introduce Jeff. First of all, everyone knows our meetings are coming up in Chicago, October 14 to 16. We're lucky to have Jason Fried there as a keynote. Many of you know Jason. He's been a longtime friend. And I'm going to reach out to you to find out what questions you want to ask Jason in that session, just to help prep for that. So look out for that. And then you saw the note, we're actually taking the councils to Omaha, of all places, next April. You know, that capital of digital product development, Omaha, Nebraska. Because as many of you know, we've been running leadership workshops in Omaha every year with groups of CEOs and CPOs, and then taking them to the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. And so this year what we're going to do is we're going to take the whole councils out there, and then you have the option to stay for the annual meeting, which is, it's the Woodstock of capitalism. It's a hootenanny. And it turns out that when you study Buffett and Munger, as I have done for the last 20 years, it turns out there's a lot they have to teach those of us in the digital world, which may not be apparent from the outset. The other thing we're doing next year, as you may saw, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go to Amazon in late May at their annual meeting. So more on that later. Let's get to the session today. So I'm really excited to have Jeff. Jeff's an old friend, actually a council member, and his partner, Josh Seiden, they actually met in the council, so he'll say a little bit about that. Many of you know Jeff Godhelf. He's a coach, speaker, author, and consultant. He helps organizations build better products and executives build the cultures that build better products, possibly the most important piece of the equation. He's the co-author of Lean UX, which many of you have, and Sense and Respond, which I'm also guessing many of you have. He also co-founded Sense and Respond Press. It's exciting, a publishing house for practical business books for busy executives. Jeff, it's really great to see you and great to have you with us today. Excited to hear your talk. Jeff's going to go on for, the next half hour or so. While he's talking, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A interface, the chat, and then we'll try to bring you in live when we get to the Q&A session. So Jeff, thank you for being here. Really, really good to see you.
My pleasure, Phil. Thanks so much. It's good to see you again. It's been a little while as we were chatting before we started broadcasting. And yeah, it's to participate in a council's event after a bit of a break. As Phil mentioned, I met, the last one of these webinars was with Josh Seiden. Josh Seiden has been my longtime co-author and business partner and friend. He's my friend as well. Always tend to forget about that little part. Josh and I met at the councils. We met at the councils, I think in 2007, 2008, so about a decade ago or so, 11, maybe 12 years ago, actually. And that's kind of a nice relationship that has bloomed into books and companies and working together and some adventures together as well. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to tell this story. In fact, I was telling Phil earlier, this is a story that I've needed to tell for a while. I've been wanting to tell this, and so this webinar gave me an excuse to kind of put it down, at least in keynote form, and tell you the story. And it's a story, it's my story, and I'll close with this as well, but this is my path. In other words, your path will likely be different. And my hope is that in telling you this story, you can take away things that can help you move forward in a direction that's interesting to you. But this story is really about continuous reinvention for me, and really how the last 20 years or so have taken shape in what ultimately has ended up being a very unexpected path and what I've learned along the way. So if we're going to get started, we have to start with a particular date. And that specific date is January 31st, 2008. Now, January 31st, 2008 was my 35th birthday. And I woke up on January 31st, 2008 on my 35th birthday in a cold sweat. Really, I woke up in this panicked mode. And that panic was that, in my opinion, looking at 40 from the right side of 40 as opposed to the wrong side of 40. I thought, I basically woke up and I figured I had 5 years before I was going to be overpaid and underemployed. Like basically, I thought I had 5 years before I was going to age out of the tech business, because people were going to come in and take my work. And in January 31st of 2008, like, this is the situation I'm in. I've got, my daughters were just born. They're not that little anymore. And, but they, you know, I was a father of two. I was married. We had a house, we had cars, we had the whole American dream. And I woke up in this panicked cold sweat about where was my career going to go from here? Because up until this point, I'd had a pretty good run overall. I had a good run for the first kind of decade of my career. I started late because I spent a few years as a musician. I actually tried to be a rock star for a little bit. And so instead of coming right out of college and getting into the workforce, I spent a couple of years on the road playing music and trying to be a working musician. And when that failed, luckily, as that was sort of coming to an end, the internet happened, right? And the internet, this we're talking about late 90s. And this was a perfect time for me because I transitioned quite seamlessly. Initially just sort of building websites for the band and the bands that I was hanging out with, and then ultimately starting to do it professionally. And so I got a job initially at a company called IXL, doing front-end development and graphic design. Front-end development in 1999 was basically you being able to spell HTML, right? And that was literally the qualification for getting a job in 1999, which was perfect for me. And this was, you know, kind of the height of the .com craze. And as that job evolved, I actually read this very transformational books, because the theme of this is going to be, there's going to be a lot about books in my talk. And I just want to talk, I'm going to tell you that books are transformational. This particular book, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, absolutely changed my life. And I'm grateful to have met Peter Morville and become friends with Lou Rosenfeld over the years. And I've been able to tell them that this book has actually changed my life, because all of a sudden this puts me on a track to become a UX designer, an interaction designer, and my career begins to move forward in that way. And I managed to kind of bounce around through the .com bubble, right? We all remember this kind of thing falling apart, right? And those were turbulent times, kind of the early aughts. But I managed to do some work at AOL for a few years, which was really interesting. And I learned a lot there as a designer. I progressed to start to build a design team at a company on the West Coast called WebTrends. At the time, they were the granddaddy of analytics providers. Today, maybe not so much. And then kind of back to New York, at a company, landed in a company called The Ladders, which is when I met Phil and Josh and all those folks kind of in the mid to late 2000s, where I was leading a design team. I was leading and building a design team. And at this point in my life, right, 35 years old, I'd clawed my way up to the middle, right? I was proudly in middle management there, sort of director of UX at The Ladders, and I'm waking up in this cold sweat. This was the run I had for about a decade or so. And I woke up in this cold sweat, and I said, I built all these things up, and I've built my life. And all of a sudden, all of these youths, hordes of youths, were going to come after my job. They were going to be younger. They were going to be hungrier. They were going to take a lower salary. They were going to be cheaper than me. And if I had to fight these folks for the rest of my life, I was going to lose. They were going to be better, faster, smarter, and I wasn't going to be able to hang out, and I was terrified of this. So on that fateful morning, January 31st, 2008, I made the biggest and most transformational resolution I've made in my life. So that was 11 years ago. And this was the resolution that I made on that morning. And it was this: I'm never going to look for another job in my life. That was the decision that I made that day. I was gainfully employed. Everything was fine, right? But my panic of, like, I've got to provide for my family said, look, if you have to keep chasing these jobs, it's going to be a losing proposition eventually. And so I vowed on that day that I was never going to look for a job again, and that jobs were going to find me. That was the key for me, and for me, I look at this day as a turning point because it shifted my perspective about how I approached the next 10 years of my career. And so I make this resolution, and it's great. Okay, now jobs are going to look for me. That's great, right? But I had gone through the traditional career ladder, kind of the traditional career path for the last decade. And so these questions started to come up. First of all, does anyone know who I am, right? If people are going to come looking for me, how do they know me? Where do I exist for these people, if anywhere at all? Why would they look for me? Right? What problems were they trying to solve that would make them look for somebody like me? That's another question that I now felt I had to answer. How would they find me? Sure, we had the internet and we had Google and LinkedIn and all these things, but realistically, that's everybody. Everybody's there. So why me? Right? And then perhaps, most importantly, if people are starting to find me and they are coming to me and they've got problems to solve, what kind of work do I want to do, right? And where do I want to take my career? So this is a turning point about being deliberate about my career choices, whereas before, it was like, oh, there's a job opening over here, there's a job opening over there. And as long as it was kind of a step forward, I kept doing it. And so I embarked down this particular path, and I've broken the path down into 5 steps for you. And in describing kind of how I went about kind of this continuous reinvention, and really starting to fulfill this resolution of having jobs find me. And so step 1, and the most important thing that I did was—
just before you go, this is great. I just want to remind people, while Jeff is talking, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A. And I'm guessing many of you may want to know how you came up with that original question or that original perspective that I'm not going to go looking for a job. But let's pause on that and keep going with your step 1 here, Jeff.
Okay. So step 1 is plant a flag, right? Where am I? What's going to be my thing that I want to tell people that I'm good at and that they can follow me? And if you think about, I can throw out a bunch of names. If I say Eric Ries, what's Eric Ries's flag? Right? It's the lean startup, right? That's his thing. If I throw out a name like Jake Knapp, what's Jake Knapp's flag, right? Design sprints. That's what Jake Knapp knows, right? I throw out the name Marty Kagan, right? You know what? Everybody has a kind of, they planted a flag in a particular place and they said, this is what I'm going to do, right? And so for me, this was my flag. My flag was this diagram. Now, if you've read Lean UX, you've seen this diagram. This was the output of a session that my design team at the Ladders did without me and then gave to me. And they said, look, you're trying to make us do design work in this agile environment, and it's horrible. And here's all the reasons why it's horrible. And we diagrammed it for you. Here you go. And, for me, it might have been kind of an ego blow as a manager and as a leader, but as somebody who's looking for kind of a place to firmly plant my flag, this was it, okay? I was going to solve this UX and Agile thing, and I was going to move forward from that. And that to me, that was because in 2008, when this diagram was created, there was no answer to this question. No good one, anyway. So that's step 1.
Before or after the financial crisis of 2008, by the way?
It's after. It's just a little bit after. So I started at the Ladders in October of 2008, and 3 weeks later, everything went to hell.
Okay.
So it's a little bit after that. So step 1, plant your flag. I found the thing that I wanted to be known for and the work that I was passionate about. So step 2, I started to tell my story. And as we began to solve that particular problem, I began to tell my story all the time to anyone who would actually listen. In fact, the first presentation I ever gave on this was a couple years later after working through this. And I was telling the story of how we had solved this at the Ladders, because it was something that we were working on. It was, again, this is 2.5 years later after my 35th birthday. So I'm actively working to find this flag and to move this forward. And then this timeline starts to accelerate from there, right? A month later, I'm giving my first talk about this topic, and it's in Paris because, again, I'm communicating about this publicly, and people are saying, "Hey, come give us a talk about this." And I'm writing about it in any publication that would actually listen to this kind of thing. And then ultimately, as I started to give these ideas out there and put these ideas into play, you finally hit the jackpot. And for me, the jackpot was March 7th, 2011. Now this is 3 years. Right. So now I'm 38 and I got 2 years left before I'm out. Right. I'm almost done. And I managed to get an article submitted and published in Smashing Magazine. Now, at the time, Smashing Magazine had 1 million readers online. And so the scale of my conversation was growing and growing and growing because I was becoming known as the guy who had some answers to this question. And Smashing Magazine published this and took this thing global. And once this article published, everything really started to change, right? I started giving all the talks were about this particular topic in a variety of different places. And I was managing to use all the channels that I had available to me to maintain the momentum for this. So it wasn't like I gave a talk or wrote an article and then nothing happened. I was tweeting about this. I was publishing on LinkedIn. I was starting a newsletter. I was writing on Facebook at the time. Quora was still, I know it's still kind of relevant today. I don't use it as much, but back then it was really kind of the early days of Quora and Medium and really figuring out how to leverage these channels in a variety of different ways. And as I did that, I learned a lot of things about how to get my story heard, right? Because you can throw stuff out there all you want, but there's a bunch of noise. And so things I learned along the way were things like following leaders in my fields. Who else was talking about this and who already had a platform and joining their conversation. I created a consistent pace for sharing my material. So there was always something new coming from me kind of every couple of weeks, every month, whether it was a tweet or a blog post or something along those lines. And I always tried to provide value, not just noise, something that somebody could try or do differently. And then as you get these ideas out into the world, some of them resonate and some of them don't. And then you double down on the ones that resonate and you start to scale those ideas. You turn them from tweets to blog posts into whatever they'll take. I mean, maybe you could even scale it up into Lean UX, the musical. I don't know, right? There's all kinds of things that you can scale them up to over time.
But come on, the next Hamilton.
That's what it's going to be. That's where it's going to be. Now look, the question, and I think about this a lot, right? Why did my story resonate? Because this is something that I've attempted to replicate over the years since then, right? First and foremost, if you're going to plant your flag, solve a real problem. My story was resonating because I was solving a real problem that many people had, a global problem, really. I had real world experience with this. And so there was a level of authenticity to everything that I was saying. I wasn't just making stuff up. I had done the work. I had the experience to share, and I was humble about it. That's another thing to add to the authenticity of your story is I shared the wins and I shared the losses. I talked a lot about the things that we tried that didn't work, that were disasters, what we learned from those things. And then ultimately, I provided, again, that practical, tactical advice for people to use. And what this does is it builds that authentic connection with the audience that I was starting to build. People were actually paying attention because this was a real world person talking about a challenge that they have and what they did about it.
Yeah.
Now, step 3. Super fascinating turn of events. So I make this resolution. I'm going to stop looking for work. I'm going to plant my flag. I'm going to start talking about this particular thing. It's about 3 years into it, and the stuff starts to take off, and people start to pay attention, and this starts to happen. I start to do less and less design work because what people were starting to ask me to do, this is interesting, right? So up until then, I said, here's what I can do. Here's what I can do. All of a sudden, people are starting to ask me to do things. And what they're asking me to do was not design stuff. What they were asking me to do was to teach the stuff and to talk more about the stuff that I was publishing, about solving the Agile and UX problem. And this fundamentally changes what I start to do for a living. I do increasingly or decreasingly less design work, and I start to do increasingly more teaching and speaking and traveling, and I'm all over the world all of a sudden, talking to people who are like, come to Korea, come to Iceland, come to California, come to Tel Aviv, come to Italy, and tell us how you did this. And I was more than happy to do it because it was fun and it was interesting and it was new and it was building the conversation. Now, as it turns out, and I didn't know this actually, and it feels kind of stupid to not know this, but it turns out that book publishers go to conferences to see who's talking about the latest topics and who has some position of authority on them. And it turns out that solving the Agile UX problem was a big deal for a lot of folks, as I could clearly see. And I landed a book deal from that. In fact, I O'Reilly and Wiley competing for the Lean UX book. I ended up signing with O'Reilly because Eric Ries had just kind of come out, become very famous, and he had signed on to do this series of Lean books. And so I signed on to do a book, which was awesome, except for one really big problem, is that I didn't know how to write a book. And it was this.
Jeff, come on.
Yeah. I mean, really, to me, it was Mount Everest, right? Literally, I'm staring at Mount Everest, and I don't know how to climb over this mountain. I didn't know how to do this. But, and I'm going to use this particular quote when my slide moves forward here. I hope that it does in a second here. The quote is this. It says, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." Right. Yeah. And so that is the, and I'm going to come back and share my screen here in just a second. But that's the trick here, is that I was prepared to take this opportunity, regardless of the fact that I didn't know how to write a book. Right. So luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Now, look, the reality with writing this particular book is that it was not easy. It took me 2 years, 3 editors, and 4 manuscripts to finish Lean UX. It's hard work. And I almost gave up, to be perfectly honest. But it provided a tremendous opportunity, that time, to continue to talk about this and for the book to build anticipation for the book. Yeah. So that on March 11th, 2013, 5 years after my 35th birthday, my first book was published, right? And it came out and it did really well initially. It continues to do well. But I learned some very, very specific things about book publishing after the book came out that really helped shape things for me. First of all, and this is very important, if you sign with a traditional publisher, they do very, very little marketing for you, almost nothing. And so at best, you have 6 months of their attention. And then they move on to the next season's worth of publishing books. Even with enough buildup and anticipation, that initial sales bump drops off very, very quickly. And so you've got to start pushing those books. And I'm not getting rich off of selling books. that was, I was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna retire off this book, and it's not. But the book itself, as kind of a launching pad for the next reinvention, was super fascinating, because what I learned was that the more hands that I could get the book into, regardless of whether they paid for it or not, would grow my audience, would grow the conversation, and would move things forward. And I did that by getting paid in books. So I would take a speaking gig and no speaking fee, but as long as they bought books for everybody at the meetup, I would take the gig. Everything I ever went to, every meetup, every conference, every workshop, every event, I always had free books to give away, like a Santa Claus with a sack of Lean UX books. I sent copies to influencers for reviews. It's always helpful. If Marty Kagan says something nice about your book and you're in product management, that's a good thing, right? That kind of thing. I asked everybody that I knew to review it on Amazon. And again, really getting people to buy a lot of books instead of paying you for it. And so really kind of following this path and then pouring gas on it to accelerate it, seizing the opportunity that came up, right? So that was step number 3. Now 2 more steps, and then we'll take your questions. So step 4, and this is the thing that really surprised me, and the career path shift that has most, what's the word I'm looking for? It's surprised and pleased me at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you would have asked me 10 years ago to teach something all right, I really had no idea how to do it. I didn't even think I'd be good at it. But what I've learned over the years is how to teach the material that I've been speaking about, how to tell good stories. And the more that I teach it, the better I get at it and the better I get at telling my story. And so I teach workshops and I speak at conferences, and that's teaching as well. I do webinars like this, where I get an opportunity to tell the story again. This year, I've invested heavily in podcasts with mixed results. I don't know if that's exactly the right path. And really taking every opportunity to teach, and to teach in written word, in front of people, in audio, in video, live online, every opportunity. Somebody said, hey, do you want to be on this podcast? Sure. You want to be on this webinar? Sure. You want to be on this thing? Absolutely. Take every opportunity because it helps you get better at the material. Now, I do want to do a quick deep dive on workshops really quickly because they are the things that I do the most in, and there's a lot of benefits here that I think to kind of growing your opportunities with workshops. So workshops give you a real opportunity to teach things in front of people and to exercise the ideas. So the things that work for us well at the ladders and at companies that I worked at afterwards may not work well at your company. And so workshops give you a chance for people to challenge your ideas, ask you questions that no one's asked you before, and to get better. You get better at telling your story. Workshops generate revenue, which is always nice. It's a nice little kind of, as a side hustle, it's fantastic. And as a full-time job, it can work as well. It generates leads for other businesses. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, hey, I went to your workshop at this thing and we'd love for you to come in and now work with us in-house. And they create a series of other opportunities as well for collaboration. Content partnerships come out of this. And you start to hear things that lay the groundwork for the next thing for you. So one of the things in the years since Lean UX has come out and in teaching all these workshops, one of the things that we've heard over and over and over again is this phrase, right? Yeah. We love Lean UX, but my boss won't let me work this way. And literally I've heard this over and over and over again. And once you get a taste for this kind of feedback, what you start to see is opportunity. And again, this is luck being ready for opportunity. And so Lean UX is now out for a few years. And the insight is this: people like Lean UX, but they can't get their company to try it. And to me, this becomes an opportunity, right? It's not an obstacle. It says, hey, I could create a conversation with the bosses, right? With the leaders like yourselves. And then the hypothesis is that Josh and I, in this particular case, can write a business book to create this conversation. Now, that was a big hypothesis for us because generally both of us are designers. If you were looking at our resumes, can two designers write a business book, get it published by a business book publisher, and increase the scope of the conversation and build the next reinvention, the next conversation? Sure enough, we were able to do this. Now, writing Sense and Respond was a far different process than writing Lean UX. Lean UX was writing what we did. We knew that material. It was the way we were working every day. Sense and Respond, we had to do a lot of primary research, secondary research. We had to get a lot of help in getting signed. This was a Harvard Business Review Press book. We had no idea how to access those folks. They didn't talk to us. They wouldn't even talk to us at first. We actually had to go find an agent who would get us in front of them. Totally convoluted and certainly not a lean process, to say the least. But we proved it, and we got the book out there, and we got it written, and it's grown the conversation and the audience and the next step forward. And so the last step I want to share with you before I wrap this up and take your questions is this. The thing that I've learned kind of most recently, if you look at this as kind of a 10-year journey from roughly 11-year journey since my 35th birthday, in the last 5 years, I've gotten very, very comfortable at giving it all away. And if you go to my website right now, there are videos of my keynotes there. You can get the team together, put them in a conference room, put my video up on the screen, and play it. And yet I still get hired to come in and give keynotes and to speak at conferences. The more you give away, the more that you can make your work and yourself easily findable and accessible, the more it comes back to you. I did this recently by putting everything back under my own name. This is something that I've done recently, and it's something relatively new. I used to publish on Medium and publish here and publish there. I've brought everything home in one place. Everything is right there, and it's free. There's no paywall. I mean, obviously for events, I charge money for events, but the content is always free, and it's always there for people to take. I always give back to the community. So wherever I am, if I'm traveling around the world, if I'm doing a paid event during the day, I'll do a free community event that evening. There's always an opportunity to build that connection with a new community, and again, to improve your material. Every single time you get in front of people, it's an opportunity to try that new angle or that new approach. Now, to wrap this up, a few things to wrap this up. So a few things to remember. And this is the hardest part. I'm self-employed. I've been doing this now for 7 or 8 years at this point. And this to me is the most difficult part of my job. It's staying relevant. And staying relevant means staying active. Active means that you're publishing regularly, that you've got a newsletter that you share material on, that you're participating in conversations publicly, that you're present in the discussion. Because the more present you are, the more relevant you are to the conversation as it moves forward. If you identify an opportunity, kind of the next thing that you want to grow into, my experience tells me that you should start that next thing at least 2 years before you need it. So if you anticipate the lifespan of your idea to kind of start to fizzle out after a short amount of time, or some amount of time, doesn't have to be a short amount of time, give yourself at least 2 years to build your momentum and your credibility and your relevance and your authenticity in this new thing. Kind of Sense and Respond took 2 years to write, and we spent that time growing that particular conversation. And so to kind of bring this home is this. Look, this is just one path. I told you this at the beginning. This is my path. There are lots and lots of permutations. And so I hope that you can pick up some ideas here and there from all of this. But if there's one kind of consistent theme that I would take, it kind of comes back to Bezos, right? Bezos, you know, people, he talks about this all the time. You guys probably talk about this all the time. And he says, people always ask him, like, what's the next 10 years going to look like? What's the future going to look like? And he says, I don't think about that. I think about the things that aren't going to change, the things that people are going to need consistently of time and time again, right? And that's going to be good process, good collaboration, good places to work, right? Good leadership, good management, feeling of fulfillment and work. And so if you can focus on those particular things, I think you can maintain the kind of relevance and the kind of authenticity that's required to kind of grow into this, I'm calling it a thought leadership role, I guess. I don't love that term, but that's ultimately, I suppose, what it is. And so that's my path. And I want to say thanks. If you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them now. If you think about them later or you're watching this on the recording, that's my email address. Super easy to find me. And as Phil mentioned earlier, Josh and I launched senseandrespondpress.com. Oops, and there it goes. And I'll bring it back. That's my family. They're grown up today. And we launched the senseandrespondpress.com, where not only are we publishing books for you, but we're always looking for new authors. And so if you're thinking about writing that book, our books are short, 10 to 12,000 words, and we'd love to get a submission from you. So that's what I have to say. What questions do you have?
So first of all, Jeff, thank you. And I love your journey, and I love the way you've thought about your journey. And it's a gift to see how you've done it and how you think about it. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, mostly because I want to give the people on the phone time to think about what they want to ask, but I'll sort of get us kicked off. First is, when you had that moment in 2008, January 31, you were 35, and you said, you realized that you were scared about the next few years and getting older. By the way, we've had Chip Conley come and talk a lot. He's a close friend. And I don't know if you know about his recent book where he talks about this very dynamic. But when you had that, how did you get to that realization that I'm not going to look for another job? Like, what influenced you, or how did that was a key sort of conceptual shift that you made. How did you get there?
Yeah. So at the time, if you looked at the career path for designers, and I'd argue that it's pretty much the same today, it was fairly limited. So you were a designer, and then you were a senior designer, and maybe a manager of designers. And if you got lucky, there was some kind of a VP of design or something
Design.
along those lines, something along, yeah, but nothing. And you know, as you go up, the number of those positions gets fewer and fewer and fewer. And so what I was seeing is that the designers who were 5 and 10 years older than me at the time were essentially starting to freelance. They were dropping out of full-time work, and they were starting to freelance, or they were struggling to find their next position. And to me, that was the signal that I was going to hit a wall. I was already the director of UX, right? So I had maybe 1 or 2 more steps up if I followed a traditional path.
Yeah.
And then what? Like, what am I going to do after that? I'm 35. I got 30 more years to work.
Yeah.
At least, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, it was kind of observing the career path around me, and seeing what the community was struggling with. And, you know, there were people that I knew who were 5, 10 years older than me who were struggling to get hired. And it's primarily because they had families, they had mortgages, they needed a high salary, and they were younger, cheaper people.
Yeah, cool. The second question, and I think this is important for our, you know, participants here, our council members, is, you know, for the most part, obviously, Jeff, most people are in either a startup or fast-growing company, or perhaps a larger company, not out there doing consulting. How would you think about your journey and how that might help someone who's in a VP of product role today and doesn't necessarily want to go out and do consulting? What would you say to them about how would you frame it for them to think about their development and evolution of their career?
So a couple of things. So first of all, if you're a VP of product today, I think I would guess that one of your biggest challenges today is hiring. It's finding good product managers to hire. Product managers, like designers and engineers, want to work with people they can learn from.
Yeah.
I think that if you can put yourself out there, and again, it doesn't have to be to the extent that I put myself out there, because this is now my full-time job and has been for a few years. But if you can put yourself out there and share your expertise and share your experience and your vulnerabilities, I think you're doing wonders for your hiring brand. Yeah. I think you're showing not only that you as an individual are willing to get out there and tell a story and be vulnerable and share experiences, but the organization that you work for is letting you do that. And frankly, that's rare. You know, most conferences, if you look at the lineups, they're consultants who are speaking because we can speak freely. Right. And so to me, I think it does wonders for your hiring brand to get out there. It does wonders for the perception of organization. And so there's a tremendous opportunity to do that as well, and to build the credibility for the practice that you're trying to create. Right.
Great. I think that is relevant. And you know, I mean, one of the challenges, Jeff, that I've been doing a lot of one-on-one calls with members, and basically saying, hey, you know, let's pause for a moment. How are you thinking about the next couple of years? Are you thinking about it? You may not be, and that's fine. Some people don't try to plan things, and I think there can be value there. But how are you thinking about it? What are your fears? What are your hopes? And one of the things that's become really clear is that there are not a lot of places to have that conversation, right? Sometimes with your boss, but that, you know, you may be thinking of going somewhere else, or, you know, sometimes obviously with an executive recruiter who calls you, but they're focused on the transaction, and they're not thinking about you as a whole. So I don't know if you could talk a little, you know, and so we've been creating these spaces where we'll bring in a VP of product who has said, at least to me and to them, and frankly, part of it, and also to themselves, I want more, I want to grow. We'll bring in a group of CPOs to just help them for an hour think about how they get from A to B. And it's like, there just isn't other places to do that, I have found. I wonder if you've learned anything about places to have those conversations, or how, you know, what helps people even begin to own their own desire to grow and have more. Because I think there's emotional obstacles as well as practical ones here. So I'm wondering what you know about that.
So it's interesting. One of the things, so one of the experiments that I've run in the last couple of years was I wanted to, so I live in Spain now, I live here in Barcelona, and one of
Barcelona,
my,
super
yeah,
cool.
and one of my assumptions is
Yeah.
that everyone wants to come to Barcelona. Um, and so I thought, well, why don't I build, I figured that's pretty safe, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to build a product, essentially an executive retreat, kind of a learning journey, learning safari, if you will, whatever you want to call it, whatever the right noun is there. I don't have the right noun just yet. I would host it here, and we do it over the course of a couple of days, and people would fly in to do that. And the target audience was you, the people who in the councils, senior leaders in organizations, and primarily product tech, engineering, that kind of thing. So dog fooding my process, I went and did customer development.
Yeah.
And I reached out to my clients, who generally fall into the category of the folks on the call. And I said, look, can you give me 20 minutes? I just want to ask you some questions. And it was unbelievably fascinating and depressing what I learned from that customer development. So I learned this. So first of all, there's almost zero investment in any kind of professional development or growth or personal development or growth by these leaders. Almost zero.
Definitely. Yep.
Right. That was number one. Number two, any kind of event that smells like a conference, or anything like that, there's this perception at the executive level that that's where people go to job hunt.
Right.
And if they went to something like that, they would be perceived as kind of having a foot out the door.
Right. Right.
And so they didn't want to show up for that. And then most of all, and the third thing I learned was that they were kind of terrified of doing this with people who were not from their company, for fear of NDAs, trade secrets, whatever it is getting across. And so the learning there is that in thinking about professional development, in trying to learn from others, from peers, or from people who may be a step ahead of you, there's almost none of that going on. A lot of it's not being sought out, and the only kind of situations, and I'm probably going to make you happy with this answer, is I've seen work is these kind of private, closed peer support groups like the councils, where there's a situation where they can actually have a conversation.
Trust.
There's trust. It's private. And there are, it doesn't feel like a conference. So you're not job hunting, right? There's none of that happening as well. So it's kind of sad and depressing. I don't know if it echoes the experience of the folks on the call, but.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can call a few people here to join us. Elliot, I think you're with us. I'm gonna set this up so you can talk. Let's see, you're muted. Let's see if your video will come in. Elliot, are you there? Yep. Hey. How are you, Elliot? It's so good to see you. So, Elliot's the head of design.
we just need one more bald guy with glasses in here, and we've got like that.
We got it, right? Thank God, Charlie. Elliot's the head of design at IBM Digital Growth and Commerce, and had been the chief product officer at the weather company when IBM bought it. Elliot, what are you thinking about? What comments or questions come up for you?
So it's really been awesome watching your career development, and the books that you've written have been really inspiring for both me and my teams. And so you made this decision at a certain point in your life to go into the direction of being a thought leader, and I too kind of despise that term, but you made the point that as you go up the ladder, and as you progress in your career, there are fewer and fewer jobs available to people, and you made a specific choice to sort of just exit that model. You basically said that's not going to be the place for me where I can expand. Do you perceive that that there are really no other options as people proceed across their career and their age, that those opportunities really are not available within typical normative structures?
Yeah, it's a great question. So two things. So look, I made a decision to stop looking for jobs and to have jobs find me. Now, my expectation, and I didn't say this during the talk, so I'm going to clarify it now. My expectation was that instead of me scouring the job boards and asking friends for leads, those opportunities would just start to come in for me. So the thought leadership would drive kind of the next career ladder step forward for me. I had no intention of stepping out and leaving the world, but kind of when that opportunity presented itself, I seized it and went that way. But that was not initially the goal. The goal was simply to just be in a position where people were looking for me to fill a particular, people had a Jeff-sized hole in their organization kind of thing, if you will. Now look, again, kind of hindsight's always 20/20, right? There's that panic of, oh my God, no one's going to hire me in 5 years. And now 10 years later, you look back and you're like, okay, probably somebody would have hired me. But look, so there are design leadership roles, and I'm seeing a lot of folks transition into product management these days because the product management ladder seems to be a bit longer. There seems to be more opportunity there to grow and to expand your kind of your jurisdiction, if you will. And then, there's a lot of folks going out and starting their own practice as well. I've seen that. So no, look, this expansion to the different types of design work. So there's like all the design ops stuff that's happening, the research ops stuff that's happening. But I still think that ultimately there are longer career ladders, like for example, in product management or kind of general management and leadership. And so I've seen a lot of folks make lateral moves into those once they've exhausted kind of where they can go in their particular organization.
Yeah. Elliot, have you written at all?
A little bit.
How do you feel you are as a writer?
Well, I'm an ex-academic. Plan A was English.
Oh, that's right. You're an ex-academic.
So I have a very fraught relationship to writing. I both love it and despise it.
Yeah. Are you with Sense and Respond Press? Are you considering, or maybe you're already doing anything to teach executives some basics about writing a short book?
No. but
maybe you could.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, look, here's the thing about it. So I'll share it. So we've been doing this for about 2 years now. And it's interesting because the hypothesis was that writing a short book would be easier than writing a long book. That's a false hypothesis.
We got the old Mark Twain quote, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, getting that focus down to 10 to 12,000 words is really difficult. And so, and that's the part that we help with. So we generally speaking don't have an issue getting manuscripts out of people that are long enough because it's not that hard to write 10 or 12,000 words. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's not that hard. But that said, getting it down to 10 or 12 focused words about one or two things, super difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's challenging. Well, Elliot, I want to bring in Karen. Can we keep going? It's great to see you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Karen, I know that you are audio only, so I'm going to allow you to, we'll be able to hear, you need to promote. Okay. Zoom is telling me I need to promote you to a panelist. So you're now a panelist, and I think we can hear you. Can you talk? Let's see. It looks like you're unmuted. Can you say, you're probably saying things and we're not hearing you actually. Can you say anything? Yeah, well, you can, of course. Her mic isn't showing up. All right, Karen, listen, maybe you can write down your comment or something and I can read it. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why the video isn't working. Otherwise, Zoom has been a pretty good interface, I have to say.
On the it's always problematic with the web interface. It's always a little problematic.
Yeah. Hey, Margaret Brown at Splunk, I'm going to cold call you here. Can you join us?
I can join you, yes.
Great. So great to hear your voice. Margaret's the director of UX at Splunk, Jeff. And
I'm trying to go on video, but can I do that?
You can, yes, if you like. That would be great.
Okay, so let me see. I will put on my video. I am in my home office in Golden, Colorado.
Awesome. Jeff is in his home office in Barcelona, and I'm in my home office.
I see that, yes. My niece is there. Everyone wants to be in Barcelona.
It's the truth.
Yeah, so I've been taking notes, and thoughts have been coming into my head. So I'm a little older than you, so I calculated when you had your moment, I was 44. I did the math.
Okay. Yep.
So I've been in this field. I started out back in the day of like web applications, and I worked at GE, where we actually had a 13th business. Anyway, long story short, I'm now at Splunk, which is a high growth, fast growing San Francisco company. And every day I feel like I can contribute. I can teach younger people. I can make a difference. I can bring in new processes. For me, I think some of what you said, I started to think about, wow, I can apply this right to my small ecosystem. And my trajectory is I have a 3 to 5 year plan, and then I want to switch careers. But I want to
perhaps make go to the theater, Margaret. Do that musical that we were talking about.
right. So with that said, you know, I want to make the most of the next 3 to 5 years here at Splunk, and my kind of life philosophy is about serving and giving to others, and kindness. So if I can do all of that and sprinkle in some of the things that you've done in your, you know, bigger stage, like I have a little stage. So maybe you can share some words of wisdom as far as how to do some of that in a, you know, 5,000 person company that is, you know, 30 to 40% growth every year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super fast moving. So
look, I think in my opinion, and I don't think there's been a better time or a higher level of receptivity. Is that a word? Okay, I'm gonna assume that that's a word.
Yeah.
For that type of content around kindness, presence, psychological safety, all of those things. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to have that conversation now because of the desire of these organizations to build great cultures, attract great talent, and maintain the kind of agility that they had when they were smaller. Now, I'll tie it together here. For an organization to be agile, and I mean that with a lowercase a, not the religion with a capital A, but the right, just like the adjective, right? And right, nimble, etc. The organization has to be an organization that rewards and incentivizes and values learning. In order for an organization to value learning, people have to feel safe being wrong. Mm-hmm. And so as an organization scales and attempts to maintain its kind of the ways of working that it had when it was younger, more kind of nimble, agile, more responsive, the ability to provide guidelines, to provide safe spaces, to provide content, to provide advice on creating the kind of culture that supports learning, which again, learning means making mistakes, that supports challenging, not challenging, but reaching out to colleagues and saying, listen, I'd love to kind of talk to you about this because I'm seeing something else, right? It goes hand in hand with what larger and high growth organizations are attempting to do, is maintaining this world of kindness, psychological safety and so forth. And so
Right.
my expectation would be that you will find a receptive audience. And I think that if you can tie it to those things, agility, continuous learning, continuous improvement, you'll see kind of top-down support for that stuff as well. So bottom up, I think it's there. And I think top down, if you can tie it to those organizational goals, and I think it is directly connected, I think you'll see good traction. Yeah.
I'm in a very lucky place. It comes from the top as well. So Splunk has that in its culture. So it's a great place to be, to try things, not worry about, making a mistake. It's acceptable. We are actually bringing in possibly some training in Agile, Lean UX and Agile. I have your book right here on my nightstand. And one of the things we're trying to do is, we've grown so fast, we're almost becoming a little bit waterfallish, and we want to bring back in that nimbleness and the creativity and rapid prototyping and testing. So after Labor Day, we're going to start working at least on the UX and design side using design sprints. And also then I'm trying to bring in some training for the whole organization, just the web marketing part, so that we can all speak the same language, and then start maybe enhancing our processes so that other people can actually come with ideas, that it's not just UX saying, hey, we need to do this, but whether it's the operations or the engineers, the front end developers. So those are some things that we're trying to do in the organization itself. So I'm going to actually go peek at your website and see if there are any videos I can play at a team meeting. So
please do.
Excellent.
Well, thank you for your words of inspiration.
I'm glad they were helpful. Thank you.
Great talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Really nice to see you. All right, so Karen, you have a great question, but we're now out of time. What I'm going to do, with Jeff's permission, is connect the two of you over email.
Sure, I know Karen really well. We go way back.
Great. Okay, so. Excellent. Jeff, thank you. It's really good.
My pleasure.
And congratulations on your journey. And I love that you're talking about it, and that you're going to maybe yourself put a small book out that I think will inspire people the way you have today.
Awesome. Phil, thanks so much for having me. And thanks folks for listening. This was really fun.
Yeah, good. Well, say hello to Barcelona. You've been to Sputnik, right? We'll talk about that later.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, folks. See you later.
Everybody.